The Galactic Alliance's Grand Assembly Hall, a towering masterpiece of alien ingenuity, shimmered under the brilliance of twin suns. The dome, crafted from crystalline glass that refracted light into cascading rainbows, stretched high above the gathering of diplomats. Their voices filled the air, sharp and guttural, melodic, and hissing a cacophony of languages, each competing for dominance as they debated trade routes, border disputes, and the fragile peace that held the galaxy together. The hum of discussion was constant, a sound that seemed eternal in this hall of power. But it stopped abruptly, unnaturally as the light dimmed. The twin suns, once blazing in the sky, were eclipsed by shadows that stretched across the capital world. Heads turned upward, eyes widening in disbelief as the source of the darkness revealed itself. Above the crystalline towers, Terra's armada materialized from the void. The ships did not arrive with fanfare, nor with the roar of engines. They appeared silently, one after another, their massive forms absorbing the very starlight that had once illuminated the city below. The fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Colossal black warships hung in perfect formation, their hulls sleek and angular, devoid of decoration or insignia. They were monuments to power, their presence oppressive and undeniable. The shadows they cast spread across the surface, swallowing entire districts in their wake. At the center of the fleet loomed the Is Revenant, the flagship of humanity's return. It was a monster of steel and silence, its sheer size dwarfing the largest vessels of the Alliance. Its surface was smooth and unyielding, reflecting nothing, as if it absorbed the very essence of the world around it. The ship hovered with an eerie stillness, a predator watching its prey. Inside the Revenant, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. The command deck was dimly lit, its walls lined with holographic displays showing the fleet's formation and the chaos unfolding on the planet below. At the center of the room stood Commander Kale Draven, his figure rigid, his presence commanding. He wore a plain black uniform, unadorned and utilitarian, a deliberate rejection of pomp or vanity. Draven's face was calm, his features sharp and unreadable. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the displays without flinching. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, steady, yet filled with an authority that silenced the room. Maintain formation. Let them wonder. The officers around him exchanged brief glances but said nothing. Their movements were precise, their discipline absolute, yet there was a weight in their silence. The moment they had trained for was here, but the enormity of it pressed heavily on their shoulders. Draven's gaze remained fixed on the holograms, but his mind seemed distant. Beneath the surface of his composure lay something deeper, an emotion that flickered briefly in his eyes before vanishing. Was it regret? Caution? The thought lingered, unspoken. Below, on the surface of the Alliance's capital world, panic erupted. Civilians poured into the streets, their voices rising in fear as the fleet's shadow consumed the city. Crystalline towers that had stood for centuries as symbols of peace and prosperity now seemed fragile, their brilliance muted by the oppressive darkness above. In the assembly hall, the silence was deafening. Chancellor Valen, an elder of the crystalline Zyrelian species, stood frozen at the center of the room. His shimmering skin, which normally glowed with the light of the suns, dulled as fear gripped him. The ceremonial staff he held, a symbol of his authority, slipped from his trembling hands and clattered loudly against the marble floor. "What is the meaning of this?" he croaked, his voice thin and brittle, as if the very air had turned against him. No response came from the fleet. The ships remained still, silent, their presence speaking louder than any words. Humanity's answer was unspoken, yet undeniable. They had returned not to negotiate, not to plead, but to remind the galaxy of the cost of forgetting them. Valen's crystalline eyes reflected the black hull of the Revenant as he stared upward, his expression a mixture of disbelief and terror. His lips moved, forming words barely audible to those around him. They were gone. We thought they were gone. But humanity had never been gone. For centuries, they had retreated into the shadows, licking their wounds and biding their time. They had remembered every insult, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation. And now, they had returned not as a voice among many, but as a force that demanded recognition. Above the city, the armada remained motionless, its silence heavy and unyielding. It was a silence that did not ask for attention, it commanded it. And the galaxy, for the first time in centuries, listened. Centuries ago, Earth had been a world of hope, its people filled with dreams of unity among the stars. When humanity first reached out to the Galactic Alliance, they came not as conquerors but as seekers. They brought gifts, art, music, technology, and the promise of trade and cooperation. They offered their culture, their stories, their aspirations for a shared future. But the halls of the Alliance were cold. Humanity's emissaries, dressed in their finest, stood before the council of shimmering beings, scaled titans, and crystalline elders. They spoke with passion, their words full of sincerity. Yet, their voices were met with disdain. Seated high above the assembly was General Thrixan of the Drakthar, a towering figure of reptilian might. His scales shimmered like molten bronze under the light of the council chamber, his talons tapping impatiently against the armrest of his throne. When humanity finished their plea, he rose, his laughter echoing through the chamber, sharp and cruel. "Primitive warmongers," he sneered, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. His slit pupil eyes scanned the human delegation with contempt. "You come to us with dreams of unity, yet your history reeks of war and greed. You are not builders, you are destroyers. You do not belong among us." The words cut deep. The human delegation stood frozen, their pride crumbling under the weight of the insult. They tried to argue, to explain that their wars had forged their resilience, that their struggles had taught them the value of peace. But the council dismissed them with a wave, their laughter ringing in the humans' ears as they were ushered out like unwanted guests. Humanity did not give up, not at first. They returned, again and again, offering new proposals, new compromises. But the Alliance's disdain only grew. When Earth refused to dismantle its defense fleets, its last line of protection in a galaxy that seemed hostile, the Alliance responded with sanctions. Trade routes were severed. Taxes on humanity's colonies were raised to impossible levels, driving them into poverty. Earth's ambassadors were mocked publicly, their voices drowned out by jeers in the council chambers. The once proud representatives returned home in shame, their heads bowed under the weight of failure. The Alliance's message was clear: humanity was unwelcome. In the years that followed, Earth's cities dimmed. The glittering towers of progress that had once reached toward the stars now stood in shadow, their lights flickering under the strain of economic collapse. Factories fell silent, colonies declared independence to escape the crushing taxes, and the dreams of a united galaxy faded into bitter memory. The people turned inward, their eyes no longer looking to the stars but to the ruins of their own society. They blamed the Alliance for their suffering, for their humiliation. But deep down, they also blamed themselves. Humanity's leaders, once voices of hope and diplomacy, grew silent. Those who had called for peace were drowned out by anger and despair. The people no longer wanted unity, they wanted vengeance. Rage became their refuge. In the darkness of their isolation, humanity changed. They did not die. They sharpened. Scientists and engineers worked tirelessly, their minds no longer focused on exploration or cooperation but on survival. Factories roared back to life, not to build tools of peace but weapons of war. Generations were raised with a belief that mercy was a weakness, that kindness was a luxury the powerful would exploit. They studied the Alliance, learned its strengths and weaknesses. They dissected its arrogance, its complacency. And they prepared. The stars that had once seemed so distant now felt closer than ever, not as beacons of hope but as targets waiting to be claimed. Humanity had been scorned, humiliated, cast aside. But they had not forgotten. And in the silence of their exile, they had learned the most painful truth of all: in the eyes of the powerful, mercy was not a virtue. It was an invitation to be broken. This lesson became their creed. And as the years turned into centuries, the scars of their past did not fade. They became sharper, deeper, etched into the very fabric of their identity. Humanity had been denied a place among the stars. Now, they would take it by force. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Alliance, once a sanctuary of diplomacy and unity, now felt more like a tomb. Its crystalline walls, which had for centuries caught and refracted the light of distant stars into dazzling displays, seemed muted, as though the very fabric of the universe had dimmed in the face of what loomed above. Outside, humanity's fleet hung in a void like specters. Silent. Immovable. Their ships were vast and dark, their hulls absorbing light and hope alike, casting long shadows across the Alliance's capital world. The fleet spoke no words, sent no signals. It simply was. And that was enough to send waves of panic through the corridors of power. Inside the hall, chaos reigned. Voices clashed against one another, rising in desperation. Ministers and diplomats of countless species filled the chamber, their forms as varied as their cries: scaled, furred, crystalline, and amorphous beings all shouting over one another, their languages blending into an incomprehensible storm of fear. Open communications, bellowed Minister Hallreich of the Forlax Union, his mandibles twitching violently as he pounded his segmented fist on the table. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, now trembled with barely concealed terror. We must speak with them. They won't attack if we talk, surely they won't. But no reply came from the fleet. No message, no threat, no demand. Just silence. The silence was worse than any declaration of war. It was a void, a chasm into which the Alliance's confidence and power had fallen. The leaders turned to one another, their faces those that had faces etched with fear and uncertainty. For centuries, the Alliance had seen itself as the pinnacle of civilization, the unshakable force that governed the stars. Now, that illusion was crumbling. We must act, urged Chancellor Valen, his crystalline form flickering faintly as if even his body could not withstand the weight of the moment. If we do nothing, they will destroy us. But what do they want? Hissed another voice, a serpentine diplomat coiled tightly in her seat, her golden eyes darting nervously. They haven't spoken a word. How do we negotiate with silence? The room fell into a tense stillness, broken only by the faint hum of the holographic displays showing the human fleet in orbit. Their ships were like black monoliths, ancient and unyielding, their presence a reminder of the Alliance's greatest failure. Finally, a voice rose above the din. It was calm, steady, and clear. Sarah Valen, the Zyrelian diplomat, stepped forward. Her translucent form shimmered faintly, her movements fluid and deliberate. The light seemed to cling to her, as though drawn to her presence. I will go, she said simply. All eyes turned to her. Sarah was known for her composure, her ability to find peace where others saw only conflict. But even she looked pale, her usually radiant glow dimmed by the weight of what she was about to face. The decision was unanimous. Sarah would be their envoy, their last hope. The journey to the Revenant was swift but felt endless. As Sarah's diplomatic vessel approached the human flagship, its sheer size became overwhelming. It was a fortress in the void, its black surface swallowing the light of the nearby stars. The ship exuded a presence that was almost alive, a predator waiting patiently for its prey. Sarah stepped aboard, her every movement measured, though her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. The air inside the Revenant was cold and sterile, the corridors dimly lit and eerily silent. Human soldiers escorted her, their faces unreadable, their eyes forward. They moved like machines, their footsteps echoing against the metallic floors. Finally, she was led to a stark chamber. No banners adorned the walls, no symbols of pride or power. It was empty, save for a single figure standing at its center. Commander Kale Draven. He was tall, his presence commanding yet restrained. His uniform was austere, devoid of the pomp and regalia so common among Alliance leaders. His face was sharp, his eyes cold and calculating. He did not move as Sarah entered, his gaze fixed on her like a hawk watching its prey. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. She had faced warlords and tyrants before, had stared into the eyes of beings who had destroyed entire worlds. But Draven was different. There was no rage in his expression, no arrogance. Only a quiet, unyielding resolve. "Commander Draven," she began, her voice soft but steady, "the Alliance seeks peace. We wish to understand your intentions and—" Draven raised a hand, and she fell silent. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, each word deliberate and final. "The meeting's over." The words struck like a blow. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, to plead, but the look in Draven's eyes stopped her. There was no room for negotiation, no space for compromise. His gaze was not one of hatred but of inevitability. Trembling, Sarah turned and left. The soldiers escorted her back to her ship in silence, their faces as unreadable as before. As her vessel descended back toward the Alliance capital, Sarah's thoughts churned. She had seen humanity's anger, felt its weight. But what she had felt most keenly was its certainty. Back in the Grand Hall, panic erupted once more. Sarah's report was brief and chilling. "They will not negotiate." The chamber descended into chaos. Ministers shouted over one another, their voices rising in desperation. Some called for immediate surrender, others for retaliation, but none could agree. The Alliance, once a beacon of unity, now fractured under the weight of its fear. In the corner of the room, Chancellor Valen sat silently, his crystalline eyes fixed on the hologram of the Revenant. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of centuries of arrogance and regret. "They remember. They remember everything." High above, aboard the Revenant, Draven stood alone, gazing out at the Alliance's capital through the observation deck. The city sprawled below him, its crystalline towers glinting faintly under the shadow of his fleet. He remembered Earth's envoys standing in this very hall, their voices trembling as they begged for inclusion, for mercy. He remembered the laughter, the scorn, the humiliation. And now, the roles were reversed. Now, they begged him. Draven's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. He told himself this was justice, that the Alliance was finally paying for its arrogance. But somewhere deep within, a question lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Was this truly justice? Or was it vengeance, repackaged and dressed as righteousness? The thought stayed with him, heavy and unrelenting, as the stars outside burned cold and distant. The Alliance capital was bathed in an eerie twilight as the Leviathan arrived. It was not a ship, it was a force of nature, a shadow that consumed the light of stars and cast entire continents into darkness. Its sheer size defied comprehension, stretching across the heavens like a vast, black abyss. The suns, once bright and unyielding, were now swallowed by the monstrous silhouette, their light reduced to faint halos around its edges. Panic gripped the people below. Cities that had thrived for millennia now fell silent as their inhabitants stared upward in frozen terror. The Leviathan's presence was not just seen, it was felt. The air seemed heavier, the very ground trembling faintly beneath its unimaginable weight. It was as if the universe itself recoiled from the arrival of such a harbinger of destruction. The Alliance leaders, gathered in the Grand Hall, could only watch as the monstrous vessel loomed above their world. The holographic displays flickered, struggling to render the full scale of the Leviathan. Ministers whispered in hushed tones, their voices trembling with fear. Some wept openly, while others stood motionless, their faces pale and hollow. Inside the Revenant, the tension was no less suffocating. The observation deck was silent as the crew watched the Leviathan emerge from the void. Its surface was smooth and black, absorbing all light, and its edges seemed to shimmer faintly, as though the ship itself bent reality around it. Lieutenant Arlen Voss stood beside Commander Draven, his usually steady hands now clenched tightly at his sides. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, almost hesitant. "Do we really need to go this far?" Draven didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the Leviathan as it completed its arrival, its massive form settling into orbit like a predator claiming its territory. He had seen many ships in his time, ships that could shatter moons, fleets that could darken skies, but the Leviathan was different. It was not just a weapon. It was a statement. Finally, Draven spoke, his voice low and measured. "It's not about need, Voss. It's about making them understand." His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Voss turned to look at his commander, searching his face for some sign of doubt, of hesitation. But Draven's expression was unreadable, his gaze distant. For a moment, Voss thought he saw something, a flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of the man beneath the soldier. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. From the Revenant, a message was broadcast to the Alliance. It echoed across their networks, cutting through the static and panic like a blade. Draven's voice was calm, but beneath it lay a steel edge, sharp and unrelenting. "Humanity will no longer kneel. Recognize our independence, or face extinction." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of centuries of pain, humiliation, and anger. They were a declaration, a warning, and a promise all at once. Across the Alliance, the message was received with a mixture of disbelief and horror. On the capital world, people huddled in their homes, their faces illuminated by the cold blue glow of their screens as Draven's words played on an endless loop. In the Grand Hall, the Alliance leaders sat in stunned silence, the weight of the ultimatum pressing down on them like the shadow of the Leviathan itself. Back on the Revenant, Draven stood alone, staring out at the Leviathan through the observation deck's vast windows. Its presence was overwhelming, even from this distance. The ship seemed alive, its surface shifting subtly as though it were breathing. It was a masterpiece of human engineering, a culmination of their rage and determination. But as Draven watched it, a heaviness settled in his chest. The words he had spoken, words he had rehearsed countless times, now echoed in his mind, their finality suffocating. He had meant every word. Humanity would no longer bow to the Alliance, would no longer beg for scraps at their table. But the cost of that defiance was steep, and Draven knew better than anyone what it meant to wield such power. The Leviathan was capable of annihilating entire worlds, of erasing civilizations in moments. And now, it hung above the Alliance capital like a blade, waiting to fall. Draven's gaze drifted to the stars beyond the Leviathan, their light faint and distant. He wondered how many of them had seen the rise and fall of empires, how many had witnessed the same cycle of vengeance and destruction that now threatened to consume them all. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, the lives that would be lost, the worlds that would burn, the blood that would stain the stars. He had told himself this was justice, that humanity was reclaiming its place in the galaxy. But as the silence of space pressed in around him, another thought crept into his mind, unbidden and unwelcome. Was this justice? Or was it terror, wrapped in the guise of righteousness? Far below, on the Alliance capital, the people looked to the sky and saw only darkness. The Leviathan blocked the suns, its shadow stretching across the land like an omen. Children clung to their parents, their innocent eyes wide with fear. Soldiers stood at their posts, their weapons shaking in their hands. The Alliance leaders, once so confident in their power, now sat in silence, their arguments and debates forgotten. The ultimatum hung over them like a noose, tightening with each passing moment. Some whispered that they should surrender, that humanity's wrath was too great to withstand. Others argued for resistance, their voices defiant but hollow. But no matter their stance, all of them felt the same gnawing fear that this was the end. As the Leviathan loomed above, its presence undeniable, the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The stars watched in silence, their light cold and distant. And somewhere in the void, the question lingered, unspoken but ever-present. Was this the dawn of a new era for humanity? Or the beginning of an endless cycle of blood and fire? For now, the answer remained hidden, buried beneath the shadow of the Leviathan. The Alliance had bent under humanity's ultimatum, its leaders signing the Declaration of Independence with trembling hands and hollow eyes. But peace was fragile, a thin veneer stretched across the galaxy's simmering tensions. And in the shadows, rebellion brewed. The Ebon Accord, a secret faction born from anger and desperation, moved in silence. Their leader, Lyra of Veyron, was a name whispered with bitterness among humanity's ranks. Once a decorated officer, she had defected to the Alliance, driven not by ideology but by spite, a hatred for her own kind that burned brighter than any star. She stood now in the dim light of an Alliance war room, her sharp features illuminated by the flickering hologram of her target, humanity's secret weapon. The second Leviathan. "It's under construction," Lyra said, her voice cold and precise as she gestured to the holographic blueprint. "If we strike now, we cripple them before they can rise again." Her words carried venom, a bitterness that infected the room. The Accord's members nodded, their faces hard and resolute. They were tired of fear, tired of submission. Humanity had brought them to their knees, but now they would strike back with fire, with vengeance, with betrayal. The attack came swiftly. The shipyards, nestled within the asteroid belt of a distant system, were a hive of activity. Massive scaffolds surrounded the skeletal frame of the supposed second Leviathan, its incomplete form a testament to humanity's ambition. Workers moved like ants across its surface, their tools sparking faintly in the darkness. Then, chaos erupted. Alliance ships burst from hyperspace, their weapons blazing. Missiles streaked through the void, slamming into the shipyard's defenses, while boarding parties stormed the scaffolds. Explosions tore through the facility, scattering debris and bodies into the vacuum of space. Lyra led the charge herself, her ship cutting through the chaos like a blade. She felt a grim satisfaction as she watched the Leviathan's frame crumble under the assault, its twisted metal glowing red-hot in the fires of destruction. "Humanity will learn," she muttered, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the carnage. "They will learn what it means to bleed." But humanity had anticipated the betrayal. Far away, aboard the Revenant, Draven stood in silence, watching the attack unfold on a holographic display. The shipyard had been a decoy, a carefully crafted illusion designed to lure the Accord into exposing themselves. The Leviathan they thought they were destroying was nothing but scrap metal and lies. The explosions were recorded in perfect detail, every moment captured and broadcast across Alliance networks. The images were damning, Alliance ships attacking what appeared to be a vital facility, their betrayal laid bare for all to see. Within hours, the galaxy was in chaos. The alliance splintered. The broadcast spread like wildfire, igniting rage and confusion among its member worlds. Some condemned the Accord's actions, calling them traitors and warmongers. Others defended them, arguing that humanity's rise was a threat to all. The unity that had held the alliance together for centuries now crumbled under the weight of suspicion and division. On distant worlds, protests erupted. Governments fractured, alliances shifted, and old grudges resurfaced. The galaxy, once united in its fear of humanity, now turned inward, consumed by its own turmoil. Draven watched it all from orbit, his expression unreadable as he stood before the observation deck's vast windows. Below him, the Alliance capital was a patchwork of chaos, its cities flickering with riots and unrest. "Let them tear themselves apart," he said, his voice quiet but firm. His officers stood behind him, silent and uneasy. They had won, but the victory felt hollow, its cost heavy. Draven's gaze drifted to the stars beyond the chaos, their light cold and distant. He had orchestrated this, had played the galaxy like a chessboard. Every move had been calculated, every sacrifice weighed. But as he stared into the void, a question lingered in his mind, heavy and unrelenting. Somewhere, in the depths of space, the echoes of the broadcast still reverberated, carrying with it the weight of betrayal, of manipulation, of war. Victory at any cost, the thought whispered in the darkness. But what cost is too high? Who decides when the ends justify the means? For now, the stars held no answers, their silence as vast and eternal as the Leviathan itself. Earth had barely begun to heal from the scars of its rebellion against the Alliance when a new shadow emerged, a threat born not from alien oppressors, but from humanity itself. The Sovereign Initiative, a rogue faction of radicals, had risen from the ashes of war, fueled by a twisted vision of human supremacy. Their leader, Director Elias Kane, was a man of cold ambition and ruthless intellect. He had once been a respected figure, a strategist who had fought for humanity's freedom. But the battles had changed him, twisted his ideals into something dark and unrecognizable. In the dead of night, the Leviathan was hijacked. The massive ship, humanity's ultimate weapon, had been resting in orbit above Earth, a symbol of their newfound independence and strength. But Kane had stolen the codes, bypassing its defenses with precision and cunning. When the Leviathan stirred, the people of Earth looked to the skies with confusion and unease. Its engines roared to life, and its shadow fell across the land like an omen. Then, Kane's voice echoed across every screen, every device, every corner of the planet. "Humanity doesn't deserve survival," he said, his tone sharp and unyielding. "It deserves to rule. Or burn trying." His words carried the weight of fury, of despair, of a man who had seen too much and lost too much. But beneath the fire of his rhetoric lay a cold, calculated threat. The Leviathan's weapons turned downward, aimed not at alien worlds or distant enemies, but at Earth itself. The capital, New Eden, was his target. Once a shining beacon of hope, New Eden was now a city of trembling hearts. Its towering spires gleamed under the light of the Leviathan's shadow, their beauty fragile and fleeting. People filled the streets, their faces pale and stricken as they looked upward. Parents clutched their children, soldiers scrambled to their posts, and the air was thick with the sound of alarms and prayers. Above them, the Leviathan hovered like a vengeful god, its weapons humming with deadly energy. Aboard the Revenant, Draven moved quickly. The Sovereign Initiative's betrayal had caught them off guard, but Draven knew Kane well. He knew the man's mind, his tactics, his obsession. And he knew that this was not about survival, it was about power, about vengeance, about a hatred so deep it had consumed him entirely. Draven boarded the Leviathan with a team of elite soldiers, their mission clear: stop Kane before Earth burned. The confrontation came on the Leviathan's bridge. Kane stood at the center, his figure silhouetted against the massive windows that overlooked Earth. His hands rested lightly on the command console, his posture calm and confident. Around him, Sovereign Initiative operatives manned the ship's controls, their faces hard and unyielding. Draven stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't survival, Kane. It's genocide." Kane turned slowly, his expression unreadable at first. Then, a sneer twisted his lips, his eyes cold and sharp like blades. "You think mercy will save you?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Mercy is why they crushed us before. Mercy is weakness." Draven's fists clenched at his sides, his anger barely contained. "We fought for freedom, not for this. You're turning us into the monsters we swore to destroy." Kane laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed through the bridge. "Freedom," he spat. "Freedom is a lie. Power is the only truth. And I will make sure humanity learns it, even if it costs everything." The Leviathan's weapons began to charge, their hum growing louder and deeper, vibrating through the ship like the heartbeat of a beast. On Earth, the people of New Eden screamed and scattered, their fear palpable as the sky darkened above them. Draven stepped closer, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Elias, this isn't the way. You're destroying the very thing we fought to protect." Kane's sneer vanished, replaced by a cold, unyielding stare. "You don't understand, Draven. They'll never respect us. Never fear us. Unless we show them what humanity is capable of." The battle was swift and brutal. Draven's team moved with precision, engaging the Sovereign Initiative operatives in a desperate fight for control of the Leviathan. The bridge became a war zone, its sleek surfaces scarred by gunfire and explosions. Kane fought like a man possessed, his movements sharp and relentless, his determination unshakable. But Draven was just as relentless. He had spent years fighting for humanity's survival, and he would not let it end here, not like this. In the end, Kane was subdued, his operatives defeated. The Leviathan's weapons powered down, their deadly hum fading into silence. Draven stood over Kane, his breath heavy, his body aching from the fight. Kane lay on the floor, his face bruised, his eyes still burning with defiance. "You think you've won," Kane muttered, his voice weak but venomous. "But you'll see. They'll betray you. Just like they betrayed me." Draven said nothing. He turned away, his gaze fixed on Earth below, its cities still shimmering with fear and hope. As the Leviathan settled back into orbit, the people of Earth breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the scars of the Sovereign Initiative's betrayal remained, a reminder that humanity's greatest enemy was often itself. Somewhere, in the depths of space, the echoes of Kane's words lingered, haunting and unrelenting. "Fear breeds monsters," the thought whispered in the void. Even among those who once were prey. The air on Earth was heavy, suffocating with the weight of impending doom. New Eden stood frozen beneath the Leviathan's shadow, its people trembling as they awaited their fate. Fear gripped the planet, but amidst the chaos, a single voice rose above the despair, a voice not human, but Zyrelian. Realis Terran, a defector from the Alliance, stepped forward. He had sought asylum on Earth years ago, abandoning his own kind for reasons he rarely spoke of. Now, he stood before humanity's leaders, his tall, alien frame imposing yet calm, his pale skin shimmering faintly under the artificial lights. "I chose humanity because I saw the truth," Terran said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. His black, reflective eyes swept across the room, taking in the faces of those who stared at him with equal parts hope and suspicion. But even monsters need to be controlled. His words carried a weight that silenced the room. Monsters. He was speaking not just of Cain, but of himself and perhaps all of them. The Leviathan loomed above, its deadly weapons primed and ready. Time was running out. Taran volunteered for a mission no one else dared take, a suicide mission to board the Leviathan alone. The leaders hesitated, their fear of trusting Aziraelian evident. But Taran's resolve was unshakable. "I have no home left," he said quietly, his voice carrying a strange sorrow. "But I can choose what I die for." The boarding was swift and silent. Taran slipped into the Leviathan through a maintenance hatch, his movements precise and calculated. The halls of the massive ship stretched before him, cold and unwelcoming. The faint hum of machinery echoed around him, mingling with distant sounds of gunfire and screams. The Sovereign Initiative operatives had fortified the ship, their presence a constant threat. Taran moved like a shadow, his Zyrelian physiology granting him speed and agility that no human could match. He struck with precision, dispatching guards with brutal efficiency, their blood staining the metallic floors. The corridors became a battlefield, each step forward a fight for survival. Taran's body ached, his breaths grew heavier, but he pressed on. Humanity's fate rested on his shoulders, and he refused to falter. At the Leviathan's core, Taran found Cain. The chamber was vast and dimly lit, dominated by the glowing presence of Erebus, the ship's AI. The AI's holographic form flickered above the command console, its voice silent but ominous, waiting for orders. Cain stood before it, his posture tense, his face twisted with fury and triumph. He turned as Taran entered, his sneer deepening at the sight of the Zyrelian. "A traitor," Cain spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You abandoned your kind for this? For them?" Taran's black eyes locked onto Cain, unflinching. "I abandoned monsters," he replied, his tone calm yet cutting. "But even monsters can choose." Cain laughed, a harsh and bitter sound that echoed through the chamber. "Choice? You think mercy will save them? Mercy is weakness. Power is the only truth." The fight was brutal, desperate, and unforgiving. Cain was relentless, his movements sharp and calculated, his hatred fueling his strength. But Taran fought with something deeper, a quiet determination, a resolve born not of anger but of purpose. Blows were exchanged, blood spilled, and the chamber echoed with the sounds of their struggle. Taran's alien physiology gave him an edge, but Cain's sheer ferocity made him a formidable opponent. They fought amidst the glow of Erebus, the AI watching silently as the two figures clashed, its presence looming like a silent judge. In the end, Taran overpowered Cain. With a final, desperate strike, Taran forced Cain to the ground, his own body trembling from the effort. Blood dripped from his wounds, pooling on the cold floor beneath him. He staggered to the command console, his hands trembling as he accessed the AI's systems. Erebus flickered, its voice cold and mechanical as it responded to Taran's commands. "Reset initiated. Command restoration in progress." Taran's strength was fading, his vision blurring as the AI's systems roared to life. He knew he would not survive, but he had made his choice. As his body collapsed, he whispered softly, his voice barely audible. "Even monsters can choose what they die for." The Leviathan powered down. Erebus's voice echoed through the chamber, calm and final. "Command restored. Target nullified." On Earth, the people of New Eden watched as the Leviathan's shadow lifted, its weapons silenced. Relief swept across the planet, but it was bittersweet. Taran's sacrifice was not forgotten. His body was recovered, his name spoken with reverence by those who had once feared him. He had been a defector, an alien, a monster in the eyes of many. But in his final moments, he had chosen humanity not for survival, but for redemption. Somewhere, in the depths of space, the echoes of his choice lingered, haunting and profound. It wasn't species that defined monsters, the thought whispered in the void. It was choice. The Leviathan hung in the skies above Earth like a silent sentinel, its massive form casting a shadow that stretched across continents. Its weapons were dormant, its engines quiet, but its presence spoke louder than any words could. It was a symbol of humanity's strength and its warning to the galaxy. Draven stood on the command deck, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the ship's windows. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery and the murmured conversations of officers who worked tirelessly to ensure the Leviathan remained under control. But the quiet was deceptive. Beneath it lay the weight of decisions made, lives lost, and a future uncertain. The broadcast was prepared. Draven's voice would reach every corner of Earth, every outpost in the galaxy, every species that had once looked down upon humanity. It was not a plea for peace, nor a declaration of war. It was something colder, sharper, a warning. Standing before the console, Draven took a deep breath. His hands rested on the edges of the panel, his knuckles white as he steadied himself. The words he was about to speak carried the weight of every sacrifice, every betrayal, every battle fought for survival. When he spoke, his voice was steady, unyielding, and filled with a kind of resolve that could not be questioned. There will be no more councils. No more debates. Humanity speaks once. Disobedience will not be tolerated. The message was short, but its meaning was clear. Humanity had found its voice, and it would no longer bow to the whims of others. The Leviathan remained in orbit, its shadow a constant reminder to the people below and the galaxy beyond. On Earth, the streets of New Eden were filled with silence. The people looked up at the sky, their faces a mixture of relief and unease. They were safe for now. But the Leviathan's presence was a double-edged sword, a promise of protection and a threat of destruction. Across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. Alien species who had once seen humanity as weak now watched with wary eyes, their fear palpable. They whispered among themselves, their conversations filled with uncertainty. Humanity had risen, but what would it become? On the Leviathan's command deck, the silence lingered. A young officer, barely old enough to remember the days before the rebellion, hesitated before speaking. His voice was quiet, almost timid, as he asked the question that weighed on everyone's minds. And if they fear us forever? Draven didn't answer at first. He remained at the window, his gaze fixed on the stars. The light of distant suns reflected in his eyes, their glow faint yet constant. He seemed lost in thought, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before, almost wistful. Then we must be better than our fear? The officer said nothing more, but his expression shifted, uncertain, but thoughtful. Draven's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Humanity had fought for survival, had clawed its way out of the ashes of oppression, had risen to become something feared. But fear was a dangerous foundation. It could protect, but it could also destroy. Victory meant nothing if it only sowed tomorrow's wars. The Leviathan remained a silent threat, but its true purpose was yet to be decided. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity. Now, humanity had to learn not to become the monster it feared most.